On behalf of the American Enterprise Institute, I want to welcome you to this lunch. And I'm just going to hand it over to Vince to do the introductions and to talk about this panel. Very excited about this event. Without further ado, Vince.
Well, I never quite know what to say to people at noon, so I'm going to say good day. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. It's a pleasure for us to do this event and have Bob Young, who is the chief economist for the American Farm Bureau, and Bruce Babcock, who is professor of economics at Iowa State University. Yeah, you just hit me, rightly so. Iowa State is
He's from out west.
Iowa State's a really important university. It really is an outstanding department. And Bruce has been director of CARD and involved in farm policy issues ever since I first met Bruce, when both he and I had no gray hair, when I was a graduate student at North Carolina State. Bruce has got 35 years experience in this.
It's infinite.
And Bob Young has double that. So it's my pleasure to welcome them. We're trying to make this a conversation. The structure will be that Bruce will give an overview of his perspective on farm policy for about 6 or 7 minutes, and Bob will provide an overview of his perspective on farm policy for a similar amount of time. And then I'll walk them through some of the key policy areas that the Farm Bill addresses with respect to subsidies for farmers. And at the end, we hope that will take no more than about 40 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A for about 20 minutes, 20 minutes. So with no more introduction, Bob and Bruce, it's a pleasure to have you here. Bruce won the Toyn Cost. If this were a presidential debate, Bruce would have the fickle finger of fate pointed at him first. And by the way, I'm not Candy Crawley. Bruce.
Okay, thanks, Vince. Yeah, I'm from Iowa State University in the Department of Economics, and I've been doing farm policy, observing farm bills for a very long time. I'm one of the probably older people now as time passes by, and as things progress in terms of these farm bills, it's interesting to try to look at the evolution of the rationales given for farm subsidies. And this time around, I think that the search for a rationale for farm subsidy has focused on the provision of a subsidized safety net for farmers. The direct payment program was not deemed to be enough of a safety net because it provided safety even when farm profits are all-time highs. So we've had to find a new rationale for that. And the underlying rationale for why the subsidies are needed to provide the subsidized safety net is I read people's statements about it, and the first one is that farmers can't manage risk without the subsidies. Another one is that our food, all that is standing between us and a lack of food security is a subsidized safety net. I've seen some that actually say that one of the bright spots of the U.S. economy is agriculture, and that's because of the subsidies. So we need to keep the subsidies going to keep the bright spot going. So, you know, if you look at those and take them at face value as trying to justify subsidies, you kind of throw up your hands and say, well, on their face, none of those are true. Absolutely none of those are true. There's no reason why farmers can't pay for insurance if that's what they want to use to manage their risks. And the U.S. is a very large exporter of the very commodities that are being subsidized. It's not like our food security is going to be harmed because of a lack of subsidies. So on their face, those reasons don't stand up to any kind of scrutiny, even the most shallow scrutiny. The other kind of justification that we're now seeing is that farmers won't be able to get their production loans without a subsidized safety net that they can take to their bank in order to get a loan. But if you just look at other agricultural sectors that don't receive subsidies, hogs and cattle, fruits, vegetables, tree nuts, all those farmers seem to manage to get operating loans. So I would agree probably that when you come in with an ironclad 85% revenue guarantee, that your banker is going to think you're a lower risk and maybe give you maybe a lower an interest rate on your operating loan, but it's not like they wouldn't be loaning you money. So I think what we need to do is put aside that there's any kind of actual public policy objective reason or a public benefit served by these subsidies, and then ask the question, if there is no real objective being achieved by these subsidies, why do we have them? And I think the reason why we have them is that farmers like them, everyone likes the subsidy, and they can get them. So then if that's a restriction that is being placed on the political system, that they're going to get their subsidies come whatever, then what we need to do is to try to design the subsidy programs in a way that don't do harm. And so that's where I'm going to be coming from today, is looking at the different kind of farm subsidies and so that we can transfer money to wealthy farmers, which is what we're doing with these subsidies, but we do it in a way, and we're only doing it not to achieve a public policy goal, but to do it because the political system says we have to do it. So what I would want to do is do it in a way that doesn't cause harm. So just a couple more thoughts on that, and then we can look at more details later on. But what kind of harm can be done? Well, the first harm is that $1 spent on subsidies that doesn't serve a public benefit is $1 that's not spent on a part of the farm programs or the farm bill that does serve public benefits. Clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat. You take $1, give it to farmers for a safety net, that's not $1 available to make sure that the songbirds in North Dakota have a place to nest. Research, agricultural research into things like how can we keep livestock productivity high without feeding them vast amounts of antibiotics. What about adaptation to climate change? There's a whole host of agricultural research where the public interest is being met. Or, of course, that $1 being spent on subsidy is $1 that doesn't have to be borrowed and then raised from an inefficient tax collection system in the United States. And also, there's also harm that can be done to the agricultural economy. Excess subsidies for safety nets have really reduced the amount of risk that is remaining that faces farmers in agriculture. When you take out a big chunk of risk, like we're doing with our current safety net policies, let alone doubling down on the safety net that looks like it's going to happen in the next farm bill, you're really de-riskifying or de-risking agriculture. It's not all agriculture, it's just on the chosen commodities that are being de-risked. What that means is that farmers are going to respond to that lower risk that's paid for by de-risking by taxpayers by taking on risk elsewhere. So what we see is that we have highly leveraged farmers going out there and bidding up the price of land, not the price of land, but the rent they're willing to pay for land because they have the ironclad guarantee of a taxpayer provided safety net. Is that good public policy? I think probably not. And then we can get in more details, but just think of the lessons we've learned over the past 30 years of bad public policy, fixed target prices, for example, or import quotas like we have with the sugar program. So it looks like that there's plenty of opportunity in the next farm bill to do harm by these provision of safety nets, and I think we can talk a bit more in detail about those. But I just wanted to lay out kind of how I view the debate in Congress and how one might look at it.
And Bob, how do you view the debate?
We love our children.
Well,
I guess when we were exchanging emails to set this up, I sent an email to Bruce and I said, so in effect, as I understand this, your job is to come in and trash the farm programs, and my job is to defend them. And Bruce said, no, I'm going to be much more nuanced than that. And boy, that was nuanced, wasn't it? Let's kind of come back at it this way. And I do think first off, let's talk about the history, a little background on how much we've spent on farm programs times past versus how much we are today versus what we're likely to spend in the not-too-distant future. That we have spent the times past north of $22-23 billion on Title I programs alone. I can remember being up here and working across the street, and those were the kinds of numbers that we were throwing around at that point in time. I would tell you that as we come through the numbers, Senate budget resolution, look at what the Senate passed last time or last year, back into those numbers, you're talking about a little under $4 billion a year for Title I programs. Maybe a touch more, but not, depending upon how you slice it, but around that kind of a number. So very, very substantial reductions in program spending. Next question we're going to talk about is going to be on crop insurance, and Bruce is going to come back and say we're spending $16 billion this year on crop insurance, yada, yada. And I would tell you that when you look at the average, anybody that looks at crop insurance programs on a one-year basis, and Bruce knows how to do analysis of crop insurance program, is missing the point. Over the course of the last 10 years, average spending on crop insurance has been a little less than 4. So you put all that together, you end up with a number, let's say in the neighborhood of about $9 to $10 billion or so. Let's try this. 300 million people, 365 days a year, 3 meals a day, 3 cents a meal works out to about $10 billion. You want that farmer to take that risk. You want that farmer to put that crop in the ground, to plant that seed, apply the fertilizer, to take care of the bugs, to do the stuff that's necessary for that crop to come up, for that crop to be produced, for you to have the stuff you're chewing on right now in the front row. You want that to happen. Now, how much is that worth to you? Is it worth 3 cents a meal to you to do that? Worth 4 cents a meal to you to do that? Because that's at about the level that we're at this stage of the game. So I just want to make sure that we put this in perspective, that we talk about this massive levels of subsidies, et cetera, 3 cents a meal. So, let's just make sure that we've got that in perspective. Is it going to rich farmers? Is it bidding up the price of land, et cetera? Price of land's gone up, yes, but I would also tell you that farmers are not necessarily going out and going in, they're not all that highly leveraged. In fact, they actually paid down debt, land debt, last year, picked up a little bit this year, but have been very prudent in their financial management of this resource. I think you go beyond that. There are other reasons that we do this. Yes, it is an issue of providing a safety net to provide protection so that producers can, in fact, go in and sit down with their banker and talk about writing loans. And if I were somebody sitting here from Farm Credit Administration or Farm Credit System, I'd absolutely be telling you that ability for them to manage their risk is key and very paramount in their ability to write those loans and to write those loans at the rate that they're being able to write those loans today. So with that, I know we're going to have a lot of conversation. I've known Bruce for almost as long as Vince has known him. I didn't know him in grad school, but we've certainly been, he was co-director up at Iowa State as I was co-director down in Missouri of an organization called FAPRI. So we've known each other for a long, long time.
So very different views on the value of the farm programs and what use they are in terms of how they're being served. Let's move to a little more detail on agricultural insurance. Bob, what do you think agricultural insurance should look like? We know it's heavily subsidized. We know the taxpayer picks up 70% of the tab for insurance for every product that's being sold right now. But what should this program look like over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I would say that it actually has been probably one of the more innovative areas of ag policy that I've seen literally around the world. And Bruce may feel differently than that, but it does allow for private folks to come in and say, hey, I got an idea, run the idea by the board. The board decides whether or not it makes sense or not. They fund the research, and lo and behold, if the market will pick it up, the product's offered, and producers decide whether they're going to buy that product or not. As opposed to farm programs other Title I programs where we basically have to fight through the political process to make it happen. Crop insurance programs, I think, to a large extent, have been shown and are, I think, fairly innovative programs. I think the structure that we have today, can a guy get into an argument about subsidy rates and things of that nature? Sure. But I do think that it's very important for us to understand that there is a very key role for governments to play when it comes to crop insurance. Crop insurance is not car insurance. Don't think it is. Crop insurance is not property and casualty insurance. Crop insurance is something very, very different. When you end up with a drought like we did last year, it'd be like, I'm going to write the car insurance for Washington, D.C., and I'm going to write it knowing that there's going to be a day where everybody in town is going to have a wreck. Now, what do you think your reserves are going to look like tomorrow after that happens today? Because understand these droughts are widespread. These disasters tend to be very widespread, and it's those widespread disasters where you need a government to be able to sit there with the deep pockets that are necessary to provide the reinsurance to be able to make that process work. So again, it's a very different product than what one talks about when you think about other kinds of insurance products. I think the current structure is actually I think works reasonably well. Again, I have no doubt that as time goes on, we're going to have arguments about subsidy rates, for example, for crop insurance. That's about the only place where the money's left, and so I have no doubt that that's where the argument will continue to occur at. But I think the current structure actually works very well. We worked through this drought last year. Again, one of the worst droughts we've had in 15, 20 years or so. Don't take this the wrong way, but looking at the chronological experience in this room, had this happened 10 years ago, had this happened 7 years ago, 5 years ago, I have absolutely no doubt we would have been in here yelling and screaming for an ad hoc disaster assistance program. And your bosses would have been the first folks to have written that bill. So we did manage to work our way through, again, one of the worst disasters we've had in a long time. And I don't remember anybody coming up here and asking for ad hoc disaster assistance. So I think that's
not quite right, Bob, but it's close. Bruce.
Well, I agree with Bob that the products provided by crop insurance are innovative. They're quite their ability to protect the farmer against risks are unprecedented. The problem is, from my point of view, is not so much the products that are being offered to farmers. I think the problem is that the taxpayers are paying such a large share of the cost of those products that farmers are incentivized to buy the most expensive products at the highest coverage levels. And so they're over-purchasing insurance. And when I say over-purchase, what I mean by that is that they are buying so much insurance that in fact the losses from this 2012 drought I did a calculation that looked at what the payouts would have been from insurance if they hadn't bought this kind of Cadillac insurance coverage that they all buy, which is called revenue protection. For corn and soybean farmers, which are the hardest hit by the drought,
Didn't you design the revenue protection option?
No, that was Art Barnaby.
Okay, sorry.
You lost my, made me lose my train of thought. Did I?
You were talking about Cadillac insurance.
Cadillac.
Yeah. So the corn and soybean farmers were the hardest hit, and they're going to get a payout of about $12 billion. If you had taken into account the beneficial effects of higher prices to farmers who had production to sell, the payout, the actual loss that was out there was only $6 billion. So the fact that it was 12 just shows you that the payout was 12 shows you that farmers are overbuying insurance. And why wouldn't you? Because you can maximize your subsidy by maximizing your the amount of insurance you buy. So Vince asked me, I think the question was, well, what should this program look like over the next 5 or 10 years? What I would do is leave these products alone. Allow farmers the choice to buy the products, but they should buy them with their own dollars. If the Congress needs to subsidize the participation in the program, they should do so at a limited level for a limited subsidy on a limited amount of insurance. And then if farmers need more, a farmer's need for insurance or for any product will be revealed best by when they have to pay their own dollars for that extra amount of the product that they buy. So if they need more insurance to manage the risks that they all face, if their banker demands that they acquire more insurance than this base level of coverage, well then the banker can loan them some more money so they can pay the insurance premium. The idea that taxpayers need to incentivize farmers to buy higher and higher levels in the Cadillac of insurance is just bloats the cost of the program. How bloated? Senator Flake and Congressman Duncan from Tennessee, their bill to not get rid of subsidies. It's just the lower premium subsidies, say $40 billion over 10 years. That shows you how much money is involved in the crop insurance program. It's not $4 billion a year. It's more like a program CBO scores now at $9 billion a year. So just tweaking with the premium subsidy formula that it can save $40 billion over 10 years suggests that how much bloat there is in that program, how much overinsurance is purchasing. So what would I do? I would de-escalate the program and have farmers rely more on their own payment of that premium rather than the taxpayer.
I want to ask one follow-up question out of what Bob said, because Bob said when you have a drought, there's so big a loss that the private insurance industry can't cope with that sort of loss. Is that right or wrong?
I know what they tell me.
Well, Bob, Bruce, what do you think?
I don't know. That's a topic of my current grad student's dissertation right now, is how big of risk is it out there. I want to measure it and then see what kind of risk it is. But let's admit, for the sake of argument, that Bob's right, the people that tell him it's too big of risk, and that we need a federal role to underpin it. That argument says then that the federal government should only be involved in yield insurance because it's the yield portion that can't be reinsured or insured by the private sector if you buy that argument. But all farmers these days are buying price protection through revenue insurance. And they're doing it for two reasons. One, it's really good insurance. But two, it's heavily subsidized. There is no necessarily a federal role in terms of a provision of what is called a missing market for price protection. Almost all the commodities, I think, except all the commodities that are covered by revenue insurance have available to them forward contracts, futures contracts, and options that farmers can manage their price risk.
Don't I remember a paper that somebody wrote about the natural hedge and why that would be a good thing for us to look at and use? And as I recall, a federal role in that paper, as I remember correctly.
That's right. So what we did, what he's talking about is, I was one of the inventors of this revenue insurance.
Imagine that.
And revenue insurance is a form of insurance that basically has price times yield insurance. And what farmers buy today is that base level, but then they buy the Cadillac version of that when a drought hits and the price goes higher, their yield losses, their crop, we're getting in the weeds here, but you brought it up, their yield losses are paid at the higher price. So when corn went from $5 to $7.50, farmers' losses this year got indemnified, calculated at $7.50, not at $5. And I didn't invent that, but
I understand.
So let's move on. I can't resist, and I apologize to Bob and Bruce for intervening. If the private insurance companies and the reinsurers can cover $100 billion losses from hurricanes, it seems a little hard to believe they can't cover a $16 billion loss, which is about as big as it's gotten in crop insurance. And that's just as an aside, and I apologize for intervening. I want to move us to shallow loss programs. We've heard a lot about shallow loss programs, giving farmers subsidies when their revenues fall below, say, 90% of their recent average. Bruce, what do you think about those programs? Are they a good idea, or should they exist? And then I'm going to ask Bob to comment on those programs too.
Well, essentially, the shallow loss programs are designed to cover the risks that crop insurance doesn't cover. And these would be multiple year declines in price, and it would be the deductible that is not covered for crop insurance. Well, you already know my opinion that we're over-insuring agriculture. So then when we pop on top of it, covering more of the risk that isn't covered by agriculture, and we're doing it for free, essentially for free. The program for cotton that's being proposed has farmers are supposed to pay 20% of the cost of it for their shallow loss version. But what's happening is that Congress is trying to find a place to put direct payments. And shallow loss sounds good because it's loss, and it's carefully designed not to infringe on the risk that crop insurance covers. Why doesn't Congress want to infringe on crop insurance? It's because the crop insurance industry is a powerful interest group, powerful lobby that is requiring them to don't reduce the demand for their product. So that's what the shallow loss is all about. It's a way of hiding direct payment dollars and transferring money in a way that sounds better. It has better political optics, and it's designed not to take away the risk from the crop insurance industry. And that the crop insurance industry is powerful. It goes without saying, but it's interesting. We talk about farm credit. Who's one of the biggest sellers of crop insurance in the United States right now? Not surprisingly, it's farm credit. Who's one of the biggest lobbyists and supporters of the crop insurance program? Not surprising, farm credit. Why is that? It's because of the commissions that they're paid on the policies that they sell. They earn lots of money off those commissions, all paid by the taxpayer.
Bob, I know the Farm Bureau has come out with an advocacy for what is very much like a cotton shallow loss program. What's your view on shallow loss?
Well, I think the shallow loss program that we're supporting at this stage of the game, or the STAX program that the cotton folks came up with last year, we put some substantial modifications into that program in the proposal that we put on the table. The harvest price option, for example, that Bruce had talked about is not in the package that we've got on the table at this point in time. I think Bruce.
Can you share a little bit more about the other
Sure.
the other changes?
Sure. We also understand that you had the ability under the proposal that the cotton folks had put on the table to buy up coverage above what the county revenue would have been. It's an area-based program that the county has to suffer a loss, not you individually, but the county has to suffer a loss before a payment's paid out, so that or a substantial amount of your moral hazard problems are taken care of by making those kinds of adjustments to the program. We also lower the subsidy rate, for example, but do leave the 10% loss trigger in there and go 10% to 25% loss coverage. I will say that we did have a lot of concern last year with shallow loss programs, and there are some you can set those triggers too high. Is 90% too high? Or 10% too high? I don't know. We've had this conversation before as well. The program that we have, again, is adjusted in order to try to meet budget requirements. I don't make any bones about that. This is going to be a very tough year, I think, for us to work through this conversation about how we design these programs. You are absolutely right, though, Bruce, that I do think those programs were designed to basically frequency of payment was very high on a lot of folks' lists, that they wanted payments to occur on a very regular basis.
This is farmers, right?
Yes, they wanted those payments, and they're people too. That they wanted those payments to occur on a regular basis. I think we came at it more with an attitude of, we need to talk about when payments are needed. You may need a big payment. That was kind of our structure last year. We modified that a little bit this year in order to again come back and try to provide a little broader base of support.
So I want to move on. There'll be Q&A time later on, but I want to move on now to talk about price supports and target price programs. The House bill had from an economist's perspective, controversial proposal to very substantially raise price supports in what they called their price loss coverage program. Bruce, who's up first? It's Bob. Bob, what's your perspective on price support programs? Please accept my apologies.
Well, we've actually got, Farm Bureau actually has a policy that says, we don't want those price support levels to be at a stage that they would actually encourage or distort the market, encourage production or distort production. I think our real concern is that you can absolutely set those target prices high enough, and certainly we have a history of that if you go back into the 80s and even in the 90s of where those prices were set high enough that they were absolutely inducing production. That being said, most of the target, and we do have target prices included in the package that we've got on the table now, substantially less for virtually all commodities than the target prices that were on the table last year. One commodity may have creeped up a little higher, but that's, the way life goes.
Can you give us a sense for how much lower those prices would be than were in the House bill last year?
Well, for example, the proposal we've got for peanuts is an example. And again, you're only talking about 1.5 million acres, but target price we have for peanuts is about $445 a ton, and last year they had $535, as I recall. So
Yeah,
those
no, I
kinds of
agree. I
adjustments.
agree with that. Thank you. What do you think, Bruce?
Well, the idea that we should actually guarantee farmers a price for their product and not only and do it in a way that's coupled to their actual production decisions is the most distorting farm program that's a possibility.
I might come back and say that we do have a limit on the amount of acres that they can receive that payment on. First off, it's 85% of what they plant, but they can receive that benefit on no more than what their total farm base acres happens to be. So there is a cap on.
And so if you're going to do a price support program, decouple it, like we had with the countercyclical program and a bit like what Bob just said. That's one of the economic lessons learned, that if you're going, so first of all, don't guarantee a price, but if you're going to do it on a decoupled basis. That is, that a farmer, if they plant another acre, can't influence the size of their payment. The House PLC program proposal was just, the target prices were too high. They were too high in the following sense. They were nearly at or above for rice and peanuts than what the farmers expected to get from the market. That they were going to drive, there was no question that they were going to drive the market for the life of the farm. Okay, no question. No one knows what the future is. They had a high probability of influencing the production decisions of peanut farmers and rice farmers and wheat farmers and soybean farmers. Perhaps even corn farmers, depending on what happens to the ethanol market. And so the target price programs, the only real justification you see for them is that farmers need a guaranteed price. But what other industry needs a guaranteed price or gets a guaranteed price? The only one that we have now is the ethanol industry, that with the quotas, that the ethanol plants, which are industrial plants, basically get enough money to cover their cost of production. And I don't know how many people in this room think that the mandates for ethanol are all that good of idea. The corn farmers really think that's a good idea because when you cover the ethanol plant's cost of production, you bring up the corn price too. So I just think that the lessons that we've learned over the last 30 years is, number one, you can set those target prices too high. And what's too high? Well, it's very hard to figure out what's too high because we can't tell the future. But the current level of the countercyclical target prices seem about right not to influence things. That's lesson one. Lesson two, if you're going to do this kind of program, do it on base acre concept, base bushel concept, base production, so you're not distorting markets.
If I could just for a moment, Vince.
No, please. No. This is a conversation.
As an economist, they teach you this in Econ 1, and I've taught it myself many times. If you want to enhance someone's income, the absolute easiest, best, most economic, efficient way to make that happen is to just write folks a check, which is exactly what direct payments were, or are, that you just wrote folks a check. The kicker is that has absolutely zero political support. And I'd love to do it. Now you may say, okay, then that doesn't justify, I understand all that. But, again, I understand where the economics profession comes from on direct payments versus other forms of support. But I'd also tell you it has absolutely zero political support here. And beginning to lose political support in Europe, for that matter.
Well, I think that's exactly right, Bob. Myopically, what frightens me is that the Europeans are looking at the U.S. crop insurance program, which only exists because it's subsidized the way it is, and saying it works in the U.S. as a way of kicking money to farmers, so that's the way we want to go. And fascinatingly, I met with a French farm group policy guy who said something very interesting. He said, "We really don't have any risk, but can we make crop insurance work for us?" You wanted to come back, and please do.
Well, I think folks, and I understand where Bruce has come from, but I think folks also are missing the point on crop insurance. I mean, the idea that you're getting rich on crop insurance is just a total fallacy. You know, when you think about it, if I were to tell you, okay, you're going to get rich wrecking your car, what happens to you next week after you wreck your car this week? What happens to your rates? What happens to your, it just doesn't work. You don't get rich on crop insurance. You still have to pay the premium. You still have to put the crop in the ground. You still have to suffer a loss. Lots of things have to happen before that crop insurance payment occurs. So I understand, yes. Is it a subsidized product? Yes. Are you getting rich off of it? Hell no. Are you maybe once in a while, as this last year happened, because of the harvest price option? Again, understand how that worked. The guy said, I want to go out and insure a yield of 100 bushels an acre on my farm. And in the spring, the price for that crop was about $5. So the time comes, he only harvests $50 or 50 bushels an acre. Price goes to $7 for conversation. So he gets that $7 basically price on those 50 bushels that he's insured, that he lost. So that's how that program works. Now, is that wrong? Is that right? That's the program that's designed, and that's what he bought, and that's what he paid for? Yes, part of that payment was subsidized, but that's how that program works.
Any comments, Bruce?
The idea that people aren't getting rich off crop insurance is primarily true in the major production regions. But if you go out into some of these states and you actually look at the loss ratios, the amount of money flowing to the farmers relative to what they put in, it's substantial amount of money in North Dakota, Texas, Montana, I can name some more, Colorado, Wyoming, some in the southeast. The money flowing is real money that's flowing to farmers, and they've figured out that with these heavy subsidies that they can actually make money off the program. So, and the reason why people bought that insurance for $750 is because the taxpayer paid 60% of the extra cost of that program. 60%.
And the farmer paid 40.
That's right. And if the farmer had been asked to pay, let's say, 70%, far fewer would have needed that insurance. They need it because everyone's needs grow infinitely when someone else is picking up the tab.
I have to interject here. When I talk about crop insurance with farmers, I say, imagine you could go to Las Vegas for a day, and for every dollar you bet, on average, you're going to get $2.50 back. Well, that actually is the world that most of these farmers are in.
But that is not how crop insurance works.
Oh, it's exactly how crop insurance works, Bob. But I shouldn't be saying a word. We need to move on. Let's move on and talk about conservation and conservation programs. Bob, where should conservation policy go?
Well, I think we're going to talk about a period, and I think we pretty well have the conservation title of this Farm Bill written. We're going to talk about consolidation of some programs. We're going to focus a little more on working lands, and I think our idea would be that we do have that greater focus and greater focus of the programs on working lands programs as opposed to land retirement programs. I do think the expectations are that we're going to talk about, as CBO has said, we're going to talk about maybe less land in the Conservation Reserve Program than we had expected even start of last year. So again, I do think that the focus of them, EQIP, again, CSP, working lands programs that help farmers improve their environmental performance. Farmers are doing quite a bit already on environmental performance, on improving their environmental performance. Actually, if you look at Some of the data out of field to market, for example, would suggest, or actually out of NRCS, would suggest that we've actually now got the country to the stage where the average erosion rate is actually less than T. And that's, to me, that's pretty significant progress. But again, I do think that the focus more toward working lands and away from land retirement programs probably very appropriate. And again, I think we've already pretty well written the conservation title for this bill.
Bruce?
That 3 cents a meal per day per family that Bob brought up, let's say that we didn't spend that on subsidies for farmers. Would that food still appear on their table? Of course it would.
Yeah.
The idea that the food on the table is owes itself to being there from that 3 cents a day subsidies to pay farmers is ludicrous. It just is. It's like so. But imagine instead you take that 3 cents a day per person, and you buy some clean water and clean air and wildlife habitat through efficient conservation programs, the Wetlands Reserve Program, the Grassland Program, the Conservation Reserve Program, the helping livestock producers have no net discharge from their animal feeding operations. The amount of money that the public would benefit far more by taking that $40 billion that's available without harming the farmer safety net, taking that $40 billion and moving it over to conservation or moving it over to research would enhance the economic performance of agriculture, the U.S. economy, and the taxpayers would actually be getting something out of it. So I think that the conservation programs that have been shown to actually generate clean air, clean water, lower soil erosion, which really cleans up water and keeps phosphorus out of rivers and whatnot, they're good programs. It's ironic, though, that the number one subsidy program that we have, crop insurance, and I kind of agree with Bob, our Title I programs, unless we're, overzealous in our provision of a safety net, they're not that big. They're getting so small, in fact, that many farmers are probably going to opt out of the programs, and because then they opt out of conservation compliance. And so all that's left is a lever if you're going to not take that $40 billion out of crop insurance and buy conservation public benefits with that money. At least, if you're going to keep that $40 billion in, at least attach conservation compliance to crop insurance. Then maybe we could keep some of those. But but again, I think that we should take those 3 cents per day and buy clean air, clean water, and wildlife habitat. I think it's a good. These programs have been shown to actually generate public benefits. Whether they're cost effective or not, that's another story. We can judge individual programs. I personally think the way the working lands programs have been designed in the past are paying farmers to do things that they're already doing. I don't think we get much net benefit of it at all. I'll give you an personal example. I apply chicken manure on my farms in Iowa. Why? It's a good source of phosphorus, good source of potassium, and a little bit of nitrogen. And then the NRCS comes around and says, we'll pay you to do that. Well, I'm happy to take their money, so my farmer that I crop share with signs us up, and we get about $2,000 a year to apply something that we've already done. I think many cases there are in the working lands that there's no net benefit, that farmers are being paid for doing things that they find profitable to do themselves. I don't know how you design a program to guard against that, but really, I guess that's better than a shallow loss program, though.
Well, if your principle is do no harm, then yes. There is an interesting area that I hadn't discussed with Bob, and we've got just a couple of minutes left, and I didn't discuss this with Bruce either. We heard a lot about disaster aid programs last year. Bob, where is the Farm Bureau on disaster aid for crops and for livestock?
We tend to oppose those programs at this point in time and have for probably the last 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm. And Bruce?
Well, you know, the disaster aid programs, they're ad hoc, they're prone to political favoritism, if you will, in terms of the application. But the actual amount of money, it would be interesting to calculate. If you had gone back and historically looked at ad hoc disaster assistance programs, and then asked the question, what if we had applied it to the 2011 and 2012? In 2011, a big drought in Texas and Oklahoma. What if we would have had an ad hoc disaster aid program there? What would it have cost? And then what would it have cost in the 2012 drought? What would have been the cost of that program? And then compare it to what we're actually spending on crop insurance. I bet we would have spent less. It's not clear to me that this prevention, I agree that the overinsurance that we have out there has prevented ad hoc disaster payments, but I'm not sure we actually saved any money doing it.
So we actually have agreement on disaster aid programs among the panelists. Paradoxically, I find myself disagreeing with both of them because I didn't think the livestock programs were that bad. So I don't think there's a lot of disagreement there. We have a few minutes for Q&A, and we'll be happy to take any questions from the floor. And if you could just let us know who you are, and we'll make sure we get the panelists to respond. Yes, sir.
Well, my name is Bill Christian with Citizens Against Government Waste, and I'm new to agricultural issues. But I had a question about the crop insurance program as I'm trying to wrap my brain around these different programs in the farm policy. Are there any other sectors of the economy that have risk insurance for participating in that sector?
So the question is, are there any other sectors that have government intervention in the form of this sort of risk protection? Bob, would you like to respond?
I think probably the closest example I could come up with would be flood insurance, homeowner flood insurance. You know, that is a federal reinsurance program, basically. That'd be kind of the closest thing I could come up with.
Which is also fraught with sort of controversy, I would guess.
It has conversation.
Yeah.
Bruce?
Yeah, the flood insurance program, which encourages basically the settlement of flood-prone areas, because you take the risk out of it. I mean, if you actually had homeowners have to pay a commercial flood insurance rate for living in a flood-prone area, they wouldn't build there. And so that's the problem with de-risking something, and I think that's the direct analogy to crop insurance. The other one, of course, is the disaster payments that come about from hurricanes. You go to the Gulf of Mexico. I was just down there at Pensacola and the Mobile Bay when one of those hurricanes came screaming through there and leveled all of those buildings that were built right on the coast. And what did the first thing they did? They went and rebuilt right there. Why? Because they got low interest loans and disaster payments.
As a follow-up, but there are no other industries that are sort of protected by the government.
So are there any other, I'm repeating the question so we've got it on tape. So are there any other industries per se that get this sort of risk protection?
The only ones I could see were the ones that were deemed to be in the national interest of the economy, which were the banks during the disaster in 2009, and the auto and GM. I mean, but those were kind of one-off. They're not a program that does it. There's no other sector that has this kind of program other than you get into health insurance. But
You know, I'd also say that there aren't too many other industries that are structured like agriculture is, with so many small firms. You know, automotive, banking, you know, there are just not that many that are structured like agriculture are, where you have just lots and lots of firms in that industry.
So Bob, we've heard about too big to fail.
I wouldn't say too small to fail, but I mean, there are just lots of,
It's a
because
difference.
they do fail. You know they fail.
So how different is that from the restaurant industry?
Well, you know, you do have a lot of failures in the restaurant industry as well. And again, farmers fail, but you get small business loans and things of that nature as well to the restaurant industry.
You know, farmers fail, but the land doesn't. That land comes right back and gets planted.
And restaurants tend to get reopened.
And it's not like if you can ever, that we have this objective of not letting farmers fail, that we have this public interest in not letting farmers fail. If there's any public interest, it's in that, like Bob said, we kind of do like seeing that productive land planted. But that's just private markets at work are going to get that land planted. If anyone can make a buck off that land, it's going to be planted. So it's not like we have this national interest, any public interest in not letting farmers fail.
We've got time for a couple more questions. No questions? Oh, good.
Elizabeth from Congressman Hines' office. I heard recently that in the last 4 years, we've lost more land than the previous 40 to riskier production. And so, Bob, I'm wondering, some of it is attributed to our crop insurance program, incentivizing production on these riskier lands. What is your take on that?
I would probably tell you that it's more what Bruce just talked about, that the market is basically saying, put this land into production. And it's much more that than it is crop insurance. Crop insurance, I won't deny that crop insurance plays a role in helping facilitate that, but I think it's much more driven by what the returns that they're able to get out of that. If we were talking about $2 corn, you'd have no interest in bringing that dirt back into production, regardless of what crop insurance program you had.
Bruce?
I basically agree with Bob on that. I think high prices are the things. High profit margins, just look at the price of land. It's skyrocketed, and that's not due to the crop insurance program. Some land rent escalation is due to the crop insurance program because you allow highly leveraged land renting farmers to increase their bids for land simply because you've greatly lowered the risk. They won't be able to cover those costs. So I think the first motivation is higher prices to bring that. We're really talking the Dakotas and the Western Great Plains land. It's pretty marginal to begin with. High prices may make it less marginal, and the crop insurance program takes a lot of the risk out of planting that land.
Sure.
Jason with Senator Blake's office. I'm just wondering what the need for revenue-based insurance as opposed to yield is.
Let me repeat that question, if I may. What is the need for revenue-based insurance as opposed to yield-based insurance?
What?
Since I was one of the inventors of that, I'll do that one. The idea behind revenue insurance is that farmers pay their bills in dollars, not in bushels. And it's so when you insure your revenue instead of your yield, what you're doing is that you are ensuring that if you have a bumper crop, say, but no price, that the market price goes way, way down, is that you have a loss because your revenue isn't high enough. Conversely, if you have a short crop but everyone else does and the price goes up, you should not get as big a payment in that circumstance because you have a high price. So revenue insurance actually, in the main Corn Belt areas that have this natural hedge between price and yield, is actually a more efficient form of insurance. Efficient means that the dollar amount of cost of providing that insurance coverage is lower than yield insurance. But that's not what farmers are buying, revenue insurance. They're buying revenue protection, which has this, what Bob described as the harvest price option, which is what is dramatically escalating the cost of the program. But that's the overall idea of a revenue guarantee versus just a straight yield guarantee.
They are buying both, don't get me wrong. I mean, they are buying both just the straight revenue product as well as the buyout.
I think 1% of or 2% of the liability was pure revenue insurance, and 90% was revenue protection.
Overwhelmingly, they're buying revenue protection if it's available to them. If it's not available, you go with whatever is available.
Exactly, but they're not all necessarily buying the harvest price buyout. That's an option, that's not
But
No.
90% bought the harvest price option, Bob.
More than 90% of the corn and soybean and wheat and cotton farmers buy that harvest price.
So we've only got a few moments left. And I want to ask both of you the following question. If we were talking about the chemical industry and an environmental problem, we would be demanding that the chemical industry bear the costs, all the costs of dealing with the problem. We would not be subsidizing them to deal with the problem. That's the long history of environmental policy. So why is farming so special that we pay them to do what we want them to do instead of regulate them to do and put the costs on them of the damages that they're doing that cause problems for the rest of the world? What's the argument for subsidizing rather than requiring that the industry bear the costs of its environmental actions?
Well, I think one of the reasons is that, rules change.
Mhm.
Our views of what's a good environmental or a good production practice change. If you go back and look at our production practices of 20 years ago, they're substantially different than what our production practices are today. Things move as you move through time. And I think that's one reason that, as we develop new technologies, as we develop new approaches to production, some of that does, and producers are bearing the great majority of the cost. I'm not saying that they're not some. I can recall a long-term task force that we had and had one member on there. He said, the quickest way to go broke is to do a lot of cost share work. And that's probably true, because, yes, there is going to be some government support, for example, terraces. Yeah, God damn it. You'll have some terraces. There's an awful lot of cost that a producer had to bear in order to put those terraces in. And again, that was a change in a regulation that, again, you said we want you to farm this way as opposed to that way. So again, I think it makes sense that you come along and do provide some support and some assistance. On the chemical industries, again, you've got very concentrated industries, relatively few firms. And in that case, I won't say quite monopolies, but close to oligopolies at the very least. And so you do come back in, and they are point sources. You do tend to give them a long time to come into compliance. You don't tend to do kind of overnight responses. So, I think there are reasons why you'd come back and provide that assistance. Again, you want these to be voluntary programs as opposed to mandatory programs. We do provide some mandatory moves without question. But these are private land holdings. And for the most part, I think for the vast, vast, vast majority, producers want to do and are doing, the best that they can to provide the best environmental footprint that they can. And it's when you come along and say, wait a second, we figured out gee whiz Y as opposed to what used to be, oh my gosh, X. That, okay, let's make that move.
So if I put my mean environmental hat on, are farmers just better environmental people than dry cleaners, who are also a small-scale operation, but are subject to very severe environmental regulations because of the spillover problems they face? And we don't subsidize them.
Farmers have had the property right to pollute forever. The original, in Iowa, the hog facilities were put on the hill. Why? Because it's easier to push the manure out, and then the rain will wash it away. They had a right to pollute. They had the property right. And reversing a property right like that, to put the property right to clean water or clean environment, is very difficult. Ask the Western water rights people about trying to reverse property rights. You see New Mexico, the recent story about the call for, I think it was the call for water or something by some, I think it was alfalfa producers, that they had a historical right, and it is their right to do it. It's very difficult to reverse these property rights, and I think that's, and the politics, of course. Why are we subsidizing farmers with farm programs? There's no reason for doing it. It's because we've always done it, and politically it's a winner. So is politically regulating farmers going to be a winner? No way. Plus you have the property rights, which it makes it even more politically difficult to regulate farmers. You could do it. The science of non-point source pollution control has advanced enough to be able to do it. Plus we reversed the property rights with the CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations. We've reversed those property rights. They used to have the right to pollute. Now they don't. So it can be done, and it only got to, that law only changed because suddenly people started calling them factory farms rather than, regular small hog farms. And so the politics of that changed a little bit. So it's property, history and politics.
I want to give Bob the last word.
I think most of our members, get up every day, they go out, they go to work. They're trying to be good people. They're paying their property taxes, they're supporting their schools, they're supporting their towns. They're trying to be good people. Is this a property right that they've had for these farm programs for years and years? Don't forget that we wrote these programs back in the 1930s, and they've been around a long time. And folks have gotten used to them. You can say it's right, it's wrong, or whatever. Let me give you an example. Rice guys. Our direct payments on rice were north of $100 an acre. And you can say that's right, that's wrong.
And the rice guys didn't think it was enough, did they, Bob?
No, they were happy with it. But that was the payment. That's what they were getting. And so to come along, so if I came to you and say you had a 500-acre farm and $100 an acre, $50,000 a year payment, if I came along to you and just said, you're probably going to react violently to that idea. I won't say it was violently, but they certainly had some pretty strong feelings about that. And I think it's understandable that they feel that way. Now, does that mean that you have to stay at that level as you move through time? If I were them and sitting in this room and if anybody comes out here and I want to say this for the camera, absolutely they should have that. But as we move through time, do you understand that budget priorities and budget realities are about to force a very different world on them? Absolutely. Absolutely. And they're gonna farm, I won't say differently, but they're gonna farm recognizing that as we move forward. Again, we are in a period of substantial change. We're in a period of very substantial budgetary challenges, as I think everybody in this room knows. I think the question becomes whether or not you do leave some kind of a safety net behind, and I think it is I'm sorry, given the structure of this industry. Admittedly, they're not dry cleaners, et cetera, but given the structure of this industry, if I don't do my dry cleaning tomorrow, so what? Are we going to produce the food, Bruce? Yeah, I think we'll produce the food. I don't think that, and I can't tell you how many times I've stood up in front of my farmers, my membership, and when they've asked the question, if we got rid of farm programs, people would starve. No, they're not going to. You know that, I know that. But would it be a different agriculture? Would it be a different structure? Would it take us time to have to move from here to there? Would there be some potential disruptions that would occur out there? I think that's possible. So 3 cents a meal a day, or 3 cents a meal. And is that number going to go down to 2 cents? Yeah, I strongly suspect over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, it'll be down to 2 cents. Is that a lot to pay? I don't think so. Again, for the kind of insurance product, the risk management products that we've got out there, are we going to have conversations about how much that subsidy level ought to be for insurance products as we move through time? Yeah, I suspect we probably will. But again, I think there's reasons why you want, tell me a country on the planet that government isn't involved in some way or another in the food supply. It just seems to me like we've gotten ourselves down to where we have about the most efficient, and most reasonably well structured. Producers are putting money on the table to make this happen. It's, they're themselves deciding how much skin they want to put in the game for how much risk they want to have. Yes, there's government involvement in that. But I just think that we've gotten ourselves, and will probably over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, get ourselves to the stage where we've got one of the most efficient government supports for the agricultural sector programs on the face of the earth.
Well, on that note, one area we didn't cover is research and development and public spending on research and development. And we didn't cover it because I happen to know that both Bob and Bruce agree on this. We need to spend a lot more money on R&D. Not to give me as a professor of economics more money, because I'm pretty useless as a social individual, but in fundamentally improving farm productivity, where we all benefit through more efficient agriculture. And so I didn't ask them to cover that. I want to thank both of you. It's been a very interesting conversation. I want to let you know how much I appreciate Dr. Young and Dr. Babcock's time. and their willingness to be very forthright about their ideas. And AEI very much appreciates them. We really appreciate you all coming. Thank you for your participation. If you have any other questions, if you want to ask Bruce any questions, ask them very quickly because he has to catch a flight almost right away. But I know Bob will be happy to talk with you too. Thank you so much.